Our next part of the agenda today is to hear from one of our faculty members, Mr. Pat Killian. I've known Pat since he was a student at MBA. He graduated in 2010, was valedictorian at MBA, and then went on to Yale University where he did extremely well and participated on their swim team. He then went to work on a master's degree in Vancouver, Canada, and he decided to come back to Nashville because his mother had been ill, combination of dealing with dementia and ALS, and I'm sure I'll say a little bit more about that today. But I thought his journey would be instructive to all of you, and so I'll let him now come up to the stage. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Pat Killian.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank Mr. Joya for inviting me to speak today. The story of my mother's sickness and her death in April is not a happy one, and it is difficult to tell. But I do have to tell it to explain how I became a teacher here, and I do have to tell it to express what it means to be working here at my alma mater. Though it's a sad story, there is some happiness to it. And it's that happiness that I hope to give voice to today. My mother, Sally Killian, was diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia in the fall of 2013, at the beginning of my senior year of college. And shortly after I graduated in June of 2014, she was additionally diagnosed with ALS. The kind of dementia she had a number of symptoms, but most prominent was the loss of speech. Even before her diagnosis, she began to speak more slowly and uncertainly, and over the next year, she lost altogether the ability to express herself in words. Dementia is fatal, and there is no cure, but a person can live with dementia for up to 8 years. ALS, on the other hand, progresses rapidly. Also known as Lou Gehrig's disease, of course, ALS weakens nerves in your brain and spine. It takes away motor skills, it saps your strength, and eventually it weakens your diaphragm to the point that you can't breathe. The association of ALS and dementia is known, but it is not common. My mother was among a handful of people who suffer from the combination of those afflictions. The onset of dementia forced my mother to retire from her medical practice. As she lost her mobility, she came to spend most of her time at home. My father, who's a cardiologist, continued to work and became my mother's primary caregiver. I have the highest opinion of my father for the patience and selflessness with which he cared for our mother over the past 2 years. In my mind, his example is the gold standard of how a husband is supposed to act. And he taught me, through his example, how a marriage is supposed to work, what it means to commit to someone for better or for worse. It was because of the immense effort that my father put into taking care of our mother that my sisters and I were able to continue our studies during my mother's illness. My sister Anne is a PhD student in English literature. My sister Mary is a medical student. And my younger sister, Bridget, is just now starting her final year of college. So during my senior year at Yale, I committed to a master's program in English out in Vancouver. I made that decision before my mother was diagnosed with ALS, when her prognosis was still several years. With my father's encouragement, I went ahead with those plans last fall, but even as I moved out to Vancouver, I knew that after the 12 months of that program were over, I would need to come home. Of course, I wanted to be with my mom, and I know it's odd to say, but in my mind, the reason I was coming home was really to help my father. I couldn't have taken care of my mother the way that my father did. but I knew that there were things I could do to lighten his burden. Around Thanksgiving of last year, a pipe burst in our house. I was in Vancouver, and when I called home at the end of the week, I found out that a section of plaster had fallen from our first floor ceiling and sewage had been leaking into our basement. So my father had spent that last week waking up early to secure the ceiling and then to mop out the basement before he woke up my mom and helped her to bathe and get her hair done and get dressed for the day, and before he then went to work, only to come home and fix everything that had gone wrong while he was away. So I didn't know how to care for my mother, but when I heard what my father had been doing that week, I knew that I still had a role. As my father's son, I needed to be the one slopping out the basement. If nothing else, I could be the one with the mop. So I needed to finish my program and come home. I first got in touch with Mr. Joya last December. The thought of working at a school was new for me. My idea of a career for a long time was to go into publishing. During college, I did several internships in the book industry. But to publish, you really need to be in New York City. And after my mother received her second diagnosis and her health began to worsen more rapidly, I knew New York wasn't an option. Over Christmas break, I came to campus to speak with Dr. Bailey and Dr. C, my advisor. Both of them encouraged me to write directly to Mr. Joya, which, admittedly, I was nervous or just shy about doing. But as I was leaving Dr. C's office that day, I actually ran into Mr. Joya as he was leaving the Ball building on his way to a meeting. Mr. Joya knew about my mother, and he knew I was in school, so he asked what my plans were, and I mentioned briefly that I was thinking about moving back to Nashville. With no hesitation, Mr. Joya said, "If you're looking for work, send me an email." That ready generosity has characterized all of my interactions with Mr. Joya since January. He embraced my goal of coming back to help my mother and father, and I think even that he made it a goal of his own to allow me to be here with them. My gratitude to him for hiring me as part of the faculty here is something, the extent of which I don't expect to know for several years. I think I'll be able to realize my gratitude only in the future. Sadly, my mother did pass away in April. You can live with ALS for 2 years, but the disease took my mother in just 8 months. I am now learning about grief, and there's not a lot I can tell you yet. I can say that I didn't cry the week of my mother's funeral, not even once. That sounds very brave and stoic, but I'm not sure that it is. A few weeks ago, I heard that my assistant coach from college and his wife, 2 people I admire as much as anyone I know, I found out that they had just had their second child. And that boy was born on August 19th, my mother's birthday. And when I got that news, I cried with abandon. I wept over that coincidence. So it's as if I feel the loss of my mother most strongly through its reflection in other people's lives. And someday, maybe, I'll be able to think about my mother herself and feel my grief and my loss. On several occasions this year, Mr. Joya has spoken about the importance of transforming grief and pain. I'm happy to say that I see a transformative element in the work that I now get to do at our school. Losing my mother when I did at 23, I feel that I lost the chance to relate to her as a fellow adult, to grow from dependency into a relationship of shared responsibilities. Returning here to MBA, I feel that I now have the chance to live out that experience with our faculty, so many of whom through their teaching, helped to raise me. Becoming a teacher myself was not something I knew that I wanted to do. But as a teacher at MBA, I have found work that inspires me to excellence. I feel driven to live up to the high standard of teaching our faculty sets. I feel driven to support you students in the classroom and beyond it. I feel driven to repay in whatever way I can the support that this community has shown my family. Please know that we are all deeply thankful for the kindness you've expressed to us and the love that so many of you have shown for my mother. Above all, I hope as a teacher here to honor the love that my mother gave me throughout my life. My mother was an excellent doctor. She was an empathetic person carried by faith who effected real positive change in the lives of her patients, as I learned from more and more of them in the wake of her death. As a teacher, I feel that I'm taking my first steps to follow her example, and I don't know that I could say that about other careers. Thank you all for your warmth, your generosity, and the largeness of your spirit. I am grateful for the opportunity to be here, to be working here and contributing to this school. I'm excited every day to be back on the Hill. Thank you.